It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Now, it's interesting, Brian. We're talking about what's required to be in the top 1% in the 20s, and that's really, really difficult. In 30s, maybe it's more attainable, but it's not broadly attainable to everyone. What I think is interesting is as we shift into the 40s, I do feel like potentially we're now hitting a swath of population that it might not require the special thing. It might not require the business idea. It might not require the entrepreneurship. It might just require really, really good decision making
and time
to find yourself in this place in the 40s. When we look at the top 1% in their 40s, the average income for someone in the top 1% is $421, almost $22,000 here in 2023.
Well, I think it's so important because a lot of people, they don't realize we all get, because of those TV shows we threw out in the beginning between Cribs, the lifestyles of the rich and famous, we all envision the fabulous 20 and 30-year-olds, but the reality is most millionaires hit it around 47 years of age. That is the age. That's why the Millionaire Next Door calculation, a lot of things don't work when you're under 40. It's because you just hadn't had enough time for you to be disciplined. Remember those three ingredients of wealth, which is the discipline that creates the margin or the money that gets invested, but you got to have enough time for it to actually grow. That's why 40s is an exciting period because now you actually have been in the workforce for over 2 decades. Your discipline, your margin, or the money you've invested has actually had enough to actually create some fruits for you.
Now, what I think is interesting is when we look at the top 1% of net worth, before I bring it up on the screen, it's still a big number.
It's
and
big.
We don't want to minimize that it's still a big number, but it's not a number that is $50 million, $100 million. I think
it's
that's
not even deca-millionaire.
I think that's what we have in our minds. If you want to be in the top 1% in your 40s, the median net worth of someone in that strata is about $8 million. Now, that is a lot of money. Dare I say it's in the top 1% of all the folks in the 40s. It is a lot of money, but it is not unattainable for someone who's had some career success, who's understood deferred gratification, who's made wise decisions with their finances through their 20s and 30s. We actually see these people in real life, in real form, with the folks we work with on an everyday basis.
Well, let's jump into what they figured out, because I think this one's going to probably get some eye rolls, but this is our experience of what we've dealt with. The first thing we wrote down was they figured out how to help others find success.
Huge.
I think a lot of people, just like I explained, that a lot of successful people, they pursue the passions, they pursue their aptitude and what they're good at, and then the money is kind of a side effect. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that. Well, I think it's the same thing. When I meet a lot of successful people, I'm sure we all have the Ebenezer Scrooge stories and the other things that are the cautionary tales, but a lot of people we have come into contact and deal with, they have this abundance mindset that yes, they are successful, but they're also really entrenched in, hey, I want to make sure I help people become the best versions of themselves. And it's this cycle of abundance where it keeps paying itself forward for many other people, not only their employees, but also the businesses that they support or work with. It's amazing if you can change your mindset on this, how it really opens up a lot of opportunity.
Another thing that we've seen in our experience, now I don't know what the causality is here. It's just really interesting that these two things are related. Folks that we see fall into this 1% in their 40s, they tend to prioritize their health, whether that be their exercise routines or what kind of food they consume or how they treat their bodies. Health and making sure that they stay healthy tends to be one of their top priorities. Now, I'm not saying that healthy living is what results in financial well-being, nor is financial well-being what results in healthy living. But it is interesting, again, in our experience, we've seen those two seem to be married together for folks in their 40s.
Well, it's evidence of good decision-making. You think about that Warren Buffett documentary that came out a few years ago on HBO. He starts off talking to an accounting class saying, hey, imagine that somebody offers you one vehicle. You get to choose any car in the world that you want, but here's the catch. You have to drive that car for your entire life.
It's the only car you ever get.
It's going to change your decision making greatly, and I think that's for a lot of people with success. And he goes on to share. He's talking about your body. Is that if you're going to live as long as Uncle Warren has lived, you do have a lot of look back. I unfortunately, I had to go to a funeral recently. For an aunt that I loved and was very helpful and inspirational in my life. But what was so interesting is I got to see a lot of my other relatives. And one of my uncles, he made a funny joke. Is he's like, because I hadn't seen him in a number of years. He goes, Brian, if I'd have known I was going to live this long, I'd have treated
I'd treat my
myself a
body
little better. And there's probably a lot of people. That's why we want to tell you, you do need to prioritize your health. I had a pastor many years ago who said, look, the age of 40 is kind of this fork in the road moment because you can get away with a lot when you're in your 20s and in your 30s. I mean, that's why whenever people get onto their kids about eating that extra cupcake, I'm like, man, I wish I'd eaten a few more cupcakes when I was younger, because it is when you're in your 40, you have to be very deliberate about now I'm getting the greens, I'm getting the asparagus, I'm a lot less proteins than I had previously because the barbecue and the brisket aren't happening as much as they are, because I am prioritizing my health, because it's important to focus on that as a decision maker in your success as well.
So let's talk about some of the hacks or some of the commonalities we see amongst folks in this strata. This is really interesting. Again, this is not a requirement. It's just something we see a lot. Folks in their 40s who hit this 1% threshold, generally speaking, equity compensation may make up a significant chunk of their wealth, meaning they likely work for a publicly traded company and part of their compensation comes in the form of RSUs or stock options, or maybe they were involved with a startup and they had some early equity in that. It's not uncommon for these individuals to work in that kind of space, and their net worth also increased in conjunction with the company with which they work.
Well, also, if you own a company, that K1, that flow through is typically a lot of time, it's based upon your ownership.
Yep.
So that income is going to be tied into your equity as well. So pay attention to that. They've also, and this is one that I really try to put out there, because so much of our society is this YOLO and the pride and doing it for the gram and TikTok, is you don't waste money trying to impress others. I remember one of the early things I learned when I read The Millionaire Next Door the first time was that most millionaires they have more pride and happiness from maybe industry accolades they've received more than the car they drive or the house they live in, because I think it's back to that passion. What are they put on this earth to do? And that's what they want to be known for, not because of the fancy car, the fancy house, or whatever lifestyle decision or the tags on the car, on the clothes they wear. Don't misplace trying to impress others. Because look, as we talked about the messy middle and other phases, most people are dealing with their own life. They're not paying attention to how fancy you look, and we've also made the joke that like Jay-Z, Zuck, and others, the richer they get, the poorer they look. And I think that ties back to don't worry about impressing others.
Another hack that we've seen inside of folks in their 40s is they understand the importance of asset location. So again, to be in this top 1%, they have a net worth somewhere around $8 million. What that doesn't mean is that their only asset is a business worth $8 million, or they live in an $8 million home. What they generally tend to do is when they build their wealth, it's fairly diversified. They use a number of different vehicles, a number of different accounts, and they understand their access to liquidity so that they also can pursue opportunities that present themselves.
Well, I want to hold it up. We have the financial order of operations, and I think this primarily happens around steps 7 and 8 of the financial order of operations. Is that we tell people build up that foundation, save and invest at 25% of your gross income. But I do think it's interesting around steps 7 or 8 of the financial order of operations. If you are somebody who's in this 1%, you're also making sure you're structuring your assets so that you can take advantage of opportunities. We all know the cyclical nature of the economy. Here's something that I think people misunderstand. Cash in the past has been trashy. It's been very low yielding. It doesn't pay much. But here's the reality. If you understood, if I had cash and liquidity above and beyond the 25% that I save and invest in after-tax money, it is a valuable wealth builder when you can jump in and buy when nobody else has cash. Think about Warren Buffett and all the times and how much money he's built, essentially being the bailout component because he had cash when others didn't. If you can understand that asset location and setting yourself up to take advantage of not only being good at what you do, but also being an allocator of resources where they're needed, where others can't go, you will maximize opportunities.